In the harsh wilderness of Arizona, where ancient mountains guard secrets older than civilization, some promises are made not just with words, but with blood, courage, and the unbreakable bond between strangers who become family. This is the story of Maria Santos, a young mother whose world crumbled in a single day, and Joseph Running Bear, an Apache pilot whose heritage would guide him through the impossible. When a medical emergency turned a routine flight into a race against death, neither could have imagined that their brief encounter would weave their lives together in ways that would span decades. Sometimes the most powerful connections are forged in moments of desperation, when two souls recognize something eternal in each other. This is not just a story of survival. It's a testament to the invisible threads that connect us all and the promises we make that echo through generations. Maria Santos clutched her 5-year-old daughter Sophia closer to her chest as another wave of turbulence shook the small medical transport plane. The child's breathing had become increasingly labored over the past hour, and her tiny lips were turning an alarming shade of blue. Maria's husband Carlos sat across from them, his weathered hands clasped so tightly in prayer that his knuckles had gone white. They were flying from their remote village in the mountains of Mexico to Phoenix Children's Hospital, where doctors waited to perform emergency surgery on Sophia's failing heart. The storm had come out of nowhere, transforming what should have been a routine medical transport into a nightmare 30,000 feet above the desert. Lightning illuminated the cabin in brief, terrifying flashes, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very bones of the aircraft. Maria had flown only once before in her life, and every instinct screamed at her that something was terribly wrong. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the pediatric surgeon who had volunteered to escort Sophia on this critical flight, was trying to remain calm, but Maria could see the worry etched deep in her eyes. The medical equipment monitoring Sophia's vital signs showed numbers that even Maria, despite her limited education, understood were dangerous. The child's oxygen saturation levels were dropping steadily, and her heart rate was becoming erratic. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, strained and urgent. "We're experiencing severe weather conditions and some mechanical difficulties. I need everyone to remain seated and secure. We may need to make an emergency landing." Maria's world tilted, not just from the plane's violent movements, but from the crushing realization that they might not make it to Phoenix in time. Sophia's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and every minute counted. The surgery had been scheduled for that evening, timed precisely because the specialist cardiac team would be available. Delays could mean the difference between life and death for her daughter. Carlos reached across the narrow aisle and took Maria's free hand. His palm was slick with perspiration, but his grip was steady and strong. They had been married for 8 years, and in that time, they had faced poverty, drought, and the heartbreak of 3 miscarriages before Sophia was born. But nothing had prepared them for this moment, watching their only child struggle for each breath while trapped in a metal tube hurtling through a storm. The original pilot, Captain Martinez, had been flying medical transports for 15 years without a major incident. He was experienced, careful, and had a reputation for getting patients to their destination safely. But 20 minutes into their flight, he had begun complaining of chest pains and dizziness. Dr. Walsh had immediately suspected a heart attack, and her fears were confirmed when Martinez collapsed over the controls, unconscious. In those terrifying seconds, as the plane began to nosedive toward the desert floor below, Dr. Walsh had lunged forward to grab the controls, though she had no idea how to fly. Her medical training had kicked in automatically, and she began CPR on the unconscious pilot while trying to keep the aircraft stable. It was then that a calm voice had come from behind them. "Ma'am, I can help." Joseph Running Bear had been sitting quietly in the back of the plane, hardly noticeable in his simple jeans and worn leather jacket. At 42 years old, he was lean and weathered, with long black hair tied back and eyes the color of dark amber. He had boarded the plane in Tucson as a passenger, traveling to Phoenix for reasons he had not shared with anyone. Most people would have overlooked him entirely, dismissing him as just another Native American man trying to get from one place to another. But Joseph Running Bear was far from ordinary. He was a member of the San Carlos Apache tribe, a decorated veteran who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a helicopter pilot and currently worked as a commercial airline pilot for a major carrier. More importantly, he had grown up listening to his grandfather's stories about the old ways, about reading the wind and sky, about finding direction when all seemed lost. When Dr. Walsh looked back at him with desperate eyes, Joseph was already moving forward, his movements sure and steady despite the plane's violent pitching. "I'm a pilot," he said simply. "Let me take over." The transition happened quickly. Dr. Walsh moved back to continue working on Captain Martinez while Joseph slipped into the pilot's seat. His hands found the controls with the familiarity of thousands of hours of flight time, and within moments, the plane's wild movements began to settle into something more controlled, though still dangerous. Maria watched this stranger take command of their fate, and something in his quiet confidence made her believe that perhaps they had a chance. When Joseph glanced back at her, their eyes met for just a moment, and she saw something there that she couldn't quite name. Strength, yes, but also a deep sadness, as if he understood exactly what it meant to watch someone you love slip away. "What's your daughter's name?" Joseph asked, his voice carrying easily over the storm's noise despite his calm tone. "Sophia," Maria replied, surprised by the question at such a moment. "Sophia," Joseph repeated, and somehow the way he said her daughter's name made it sound like a prayer. "That means wisdom in Greek. She's going to need all the wisdom she can get to fight through this." The storm was not letting up. If anything, it seemed to be intensifying, with wind gusts that threatened to tear the small aircraft apart. Joseph's trained eye scanned the instrument panel, noting several red warning lights that hadn't been there when Captain Martinez was flying. The hydraulics were failing, fuel pressure was dropping, and they were still at least 40 minutes from Phoenix under normal conditions. But these were far from normal conditions. The GPS system was malfunctioning, interference from the storm making it impossible to get an accurate read on their position. The radio was crackling with static, making communication with air traffic control nearly impossible. They were essentially flying blind through one of the worst storms to hit the Arizona desert in decades. Joseph's grandfather had always told him that when a modern world failed, the old knowledge would still be there, waiting. As a child growing up on a reservation, Joseph had learned to read the landscape from the air during flights with his uncle, a crop duster who had taught him that the earth itself could be a navigation system for those who knew how to look. Now, peering through the storm-darkened sky, Joseph began to look for the subtle signs his grandfather had taught him. The way certain mountain peaks caught the light even in heavy weather, the patterns of wind that indicated nearby canyons, the color of the sky that suggested proximity to water. It was ancient knowledge, passed down through generations of Apache who had navigated this harsh landscape long before the first airplane ever took flight. Sophia's condition continued to worsen. Dr. Walsh had moved back to sit beside the child, monitoring her oxygen levels and adjusting the portable equipment as best she could. The little girl was conscious but barely responsive, her dark eyes fixed on her mother's face with a kind of trust that broke Maria's heart. "Mommy," Sophia whispered in Spanish, her voice so faint that Maria had to lean down to hear her. "Are we going to make it?" Before Maria could answer, Joseph's voice filled the cabin again. "Sophia, do you know any stories about eagles?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, but Sophia's eyes shifted toward the pilot's seat, showing the first spark of interest she had displayed since the flight began. "My abuela tells me stories about eagles," Sophia said, her breathing still labored but her voice slightly stronger. "Eagles are very special to my people," Joseph continued, his hands steady on the controls as he navigated through another wall of turbulence. "We believe they carry our prayers to the Creator. When an eagle flies through a storm, it doesn't fight against the wind. It uses the storm's power to rise higher." Maria found herself listening intently, drawn into the strange comfort of this man's words. There is something about the way he spoke that made her believe he had faced storms before and emerged stronger. "Right now, we're like that eagle," Joseph continued. "This storm is scary, yes, but it's also going to help us get to where we need to go. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most important places." The plane shuddered violently, and Dr. Walsh called out that Sophia's oxygen levels were dropping again. They needed to get to Phoenix immediately, but the storm showed no signs of clearing, and the mechanical problems were getting worse by the minute. It was then that Joseph made a decision that would change all their lives forever. Instead of continuing the straight path to Phoenix, he began to bank the aircraft toward the east, following an instinct that came from deep in his Apache heritage. "Where are you going?" Dr. Walsh called out, concern evident in her voice. "There's a place," Joseph replied, his voice calm but determined. "It's not on any official flight plan, but it might be our best chance." Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. They were already gambling with her daughter's life by being in the air during such dangerous conditions. Now this stranger was suggesting they deviate from their planned route based on what seemed like intuition. But when she looked at Sophia, saw how her daughter's breathing was becoming more and more shallow, Maria realized they might not have any other choice. The flight to Phoenix was still at least 30 minutes away, assuming the plane could even make it that far with its failing systems. "What place?" she asked, surprising herself by speaking directly to the pilot. Joseph was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the storm-darkened landscape below. "My grandfather used to tell stories about a hidden valley in these mountains. The old Apache called it the place of healing. White settlers built a small airstrip there during World War II, but it was abandoned after the war. Most people don't even know it exists anymore." "Is it still functional?" Dr. Walsh asked. "I don't know," Joseph admitted. "I've never seen it myself, but my grandfather described the landmarks so many times that I think I could find it even in this storm. And if we can land there, we'd be less than an hour by road from Phoenix. There might be someone who could help us get Sophia to the hospital." The alternative was becoming increasingly clear. Captain Martinez was still unconscious, and Dr. Walsh was concerned he might not survive without immediate medical attention. The plane's mechanical problems were multiplying, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Even if they could make it to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, the delays caused by the weather and emergency landing procedures might cost them precious time they didn't have. Maria looked at her husband Carlos, seeing her own desperate hope reflected in his eyes. They had come so far already, traveled from their small village to the United States because American doctors had offered Sophia a chance that didn't exist anywhere else. The surgery was experimental, risky, but it was their daughter's only hope for a normal life. "If we don't try something different, we're not going to make it," Joseph said quietly, and Maria could hear the weight of responsibility in his voice. I can't promise you that this will work, but I can promise you that I will do everything in my power to get Sophia to safety. The word promise hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Maria had heard many promises in her life, most of them broken by circumstances beyond anyone's control. But there was something in this Apache pilot's voice that made her believe he meant every word. Sophia stirred in her arms, and for a moment her eyes focused clearly on her mother's face. "Mommy, I'm scared," she whispered. "I know, Mija," Maria replied, smoothing her daughter's dark hair. "But I think this man is going to help us." She looked toward the pilot's seat, where Joseph continued to navigate through the storm with steady hands and unwavering concentration. "What's your name?" she called out. "Joseph Running Bear," he replied. "Joseph," Maria repeated, tasting the familiar name. "Like the Joseph from the Bible. The one who saved his people from famine." "Something like that," Joseph said, and she could hear a slight smile in his voice despite the gravity of their situation. The plane banked more sharply now, following a course that took them deeper into the mountain wilderness. Below them, the landscape was a maze of canyons and mesas, all shrouded in the storm's darkness. Lightning continued to illuminate the sky in brief, violent flashes, revealing glimpses of a terrain that seemed both beautiful and forbidding. Dr. Walsh had moved back to Captain Martinez, checking his vital signs and adjusting the oxygen mask over his face. The unconscious pilot was stable but critical, and she knew that without proper hospital care, his chances of survival were diminishing with each passing minute. "How will you find this place in all this darkness?" Carlos asked, speaking for the first time since Joseph had taken over the controls. "My grandfather taught me to read the land like a map," Joseph replied. "Every mountain, every canyon, every bend in a river has its own signature. Even when you can't see them clearly, you can feel their presence if you know what to look for." As if to prove his point, Joseph pointed toward a barely visible gap between two mountain peaks. "There," he said, "that's the Eagle's Gate. My grandfather said it guards the entrance to the hidden valley." Maria squinted through the storm-darkened window, but could see nothing that looked like a gate or an entrance to anything. To her untrained eye, it looked like more of the same rugged terrain they had been flying over for the past hour. But Joseph seemed confident in his navigation, adjusting their course with small, precise movements that suggested he was following landmarks invisible to everyone else on the plane. The aircraft continued to struggle against the storm, but under his control, it felt less like they were fighting a losing battle and more like they were being guided by something larger than themselves. Sophia's breathing had become so shallow that Maria had to put her ear close to her daughter's lips to make sure she was still alive. The portable oxygen equipment was helping, but Dr. Walsh had warned them that Sophia's condition would continue to deteriorate until she received the surgery that could repair her damaged heart. "Tell me about your daughter," Joseph said, his voice cutting through Maria's growing panic. The request surprised her. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. What does she like to do? What makes her laugh? What are her dreams?" Maria found herself talking about Sophia's love for drawing, about the pictures she made of birds and flowers that covered every wall of their small house. She told him about how Sophia would spend hours watching the sky, making up stories about the clouds and the mountains in the distance. She described her daughter's gentle nature, the way she befriended every stray animal in their village, and her dream of becoming a teacher so she could help other children learn to read. As Maria spoke, she realized that talking about Sophia's life, her hopes, and dreams was helping her stay calm and focused. It reminded her that her daughter was not just a patient with a failing heart, but a complete person with a future worth fighting for. She sounds like a very special little girl, Joseph said when Maria finished. The kind of person who makes the world a better place just by being in it. She is, Maria replied, her voice thick with emotion. That's why we have to save her. We will, Joseph said, and something in his tone made it sound less like hope and more like a sacred vow. The plane had been flying for nearly 2 hours now, much longer than the original flight plan had called for. The fuel gauge was showing dangerously low levels, and several more warning lights had appeared on the instrument panel. But Joseph continued to navigate through the storm with the same steady confidence he had shown from the beginning. Then, through a brief break in the clouds, Maria saw something that made her heart leap. Far below them, barely visible through the rain and darkness, was a thin line cut into the side of a mountain. It looked too straight to be natural, too purposeful to be accidental. "Is that it?" she asked, pointing toward the barely visible line. "That's it," Joseph confirmed. "The old military airstrip. It's been abandoned for almost 80 years, but from up here, it looks like it might still be usable." Dr. Walsh looked up from her patient monitoring equipment, concern evident in her voice. "Are you sure it's safe to land there?" "I won't lie to you," Joseph replied. "This is going to be dangerous. The strip is short, probably rough, and I have no idea what condition it's in. But our fuel is almost gone, and Sophia needs help now." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "But I promise you this. I will get us down safely, and I will make sure Sophia gets the help she needs." There was that word again, promise. But this time, Maria felt something settle deep in her chest, a peace that she couldn't explain even to herself. This stranger, this Apache pilot who had appeared in their lives at the moment they needed him most, was asking her to trust him with everything that mattered to her. Looking down at Sophia's pale face, seeing the trust in her daughter's eyes, Maria made her decision. "We believe you," she said simply. Joseph nodded and began his approach to the abandoned airstrip, guiding the struggling aircraft through the storm toward their uncertain but hopeful future. The approach to the abandoned airstrip was unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. Through the storm-lashed windows, she watched Joseph guide the failing aircraft toward what looked like nothing more than a scar on a mountainside. The landing strip appeared impossibly short and rough, carved into the terrain decades ago by military engineers who probably never imagined it would one day serve as a lifeline for a dying child. Joseph's hands moved over the controls with the precision of a surgeon, making constant adjustments to compensate for the crosswinds and the plane's mechanical failures. The hydraulic system had completely failed now, meaning he had to rely on manual control for everything. Each movement of the stick required significant physical effort, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold air rushing through a crack in the cabin seal. "Everyone hold on," he called back to them. "This is going to be rough." Dr. Walsh had secured Captain Martinez as best she could and was now focused entirely on keeping Sophia stable during what would certainly be a jarring landing. The portable medical equipment was strapped down, but she knew that the impact could potentially damage the delicate machinery keeping the little girl alive. Carlos had moved across the aisle to sit beside his wife and daughter, creating a human shield around Sophia with his body. His lips moved in silent prayer, calling upon every saint he could remember from his childhood in the church. Maria found herself praying too, but also holding tight to the strange sense of peace that Joseph's presence had brought her. The plane dropped suddenly, caught in a downdraft that made Maria's stomach lurch. Through the window, she could see rocky outcroppings rushing past, so close that it seemed they would surely crash into the mountainside. But Joseph corrected smoothly, using the wind patterns he seemed to read instinctively to guide them toward the narrow strip of relatively flat ground. "There's an old hangar," Joseph announced, pointing toward a weathered building that had somehow survived 8 decades of mountain weather. "If we can get Sophia there, at least we'll have some shelter while we figure out how to get her to Phoenix." The wheels touched down with a bone-jarring impact that rattled every bolt in the aircraft. The plane bounced twice, then settled into a wild slide across the uneven surface of the old runway. Joseph fought to keep the aircraft straight as they careened toward the far end of the strip, where the flat ground gave way to a steep drop-off in the canyon below. For a terrifying moment, it seemed they would slide right off the edge. The brakes were barely functional, and the wet surface provided little traction. But somehow, impossibly, the plane came to a shuddering stop just yards from disaster. The sudden silence after the engine shut down was almost as overwhelming as the storm had been. For several seconds, nobody spoke, hardly believing they were actually on the ground and alive. "Is everyone okay?" Joseph asked, turning in his seat to check on his passengers. "Sophia's still with us," Dr. Walsh reported, checking the child's vital signs. "But we need to get her to proper medical facilities as soon as possible. Her oxygen saturation is dangerously low." Joseph was already moving, unbuckling his harness, and standing to assess their situation. Through the windows, they could see that the storm was still raging outside, but at least they were no longer at its mercy in a failing aircraft. "The old hangar looks structurally sound," he said, studying the building through the rain-streaked glass. "We can move everyone there, get Captain Martinez and Sophia out of this cold. Then I'll see if I can find a way to contact someone about getting us to Phoenix." The transfer from the plane to the hangar was harrowing. The wind was fierce, driving rain horizontally across the abandoned airstrip. Joseph and Carlos worked together to carry Captain Martinez, while Dr. Walsh and Maria carefully transported Sophia and the medical equipment. The hangar was larger than it had appeared from the air, with enough space for several aircraft. The concrete floor was cracked and stained, and years of abandonment had left it filled with debris and the remnants of old military equipment. But it was dry and offered protection from a storm, which made it seem like a palace compared to their situation in the failing aircraft. Joseph quickly set about making the space as comfortable as possible. He found some old military blankets in surprisingly good condition, stored in a metal cabinet that had protected them from decades of weather. He also discovered a hand crank radio, vintage military issue, which might provide a way to communicate with the outside world. While Joseph worked on the radio, try to raise someone on the emergency frequencies, Dr. Walsh continued monitoring both her patients. Captain Martinez was stable but unconscious, and she was growing increasingly concerned about his condition. Sophia was awake but lethargic, her breathing shallow and her coloring poor. "How far are we from Phoenix?" Maria asked Joseph as he worked with the radio's controls. "By road, probably about 60 miles, he replied, adjusting the antenna and cycling through frequencies. "But in this storm, and with the condition of the mountain roads, it could take hours to get there even if we had transportation." "We don't have hours, Dr." Walsh said quietly, but her words carried clearly in the still air of the hangar. Joseph paused in his work with the radio and looked at the small group of people whose lives had become intertwined by circumstance and desperation. In the pale light filtering through the hangar's grimy windows, they looked like refugees from some greater disaster, huddled together against forces beyond their control. But Joseph Running Bear had been shaped by a culture that understood survival in harsh conditions, that had learned to find hope in the most desperate circumstances. His Apache ancestors had survived centuries of challenge, persecution, and hardship by relying on each other, by never giving up, and by understanding that sometimes salvation came from unexpected sources. There might be another way, he said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. He walked to the hangar's large doors and peered out into the storm. Through the rain, he could just make out a narrow road that led down from the airstrip toward the valley below. It was probably the same road the military had used during World War II to supply the base, which meant it might still connect to the main highway system. "What are you thinking?" Carlos asked. "My truck," Joseph replied. "I left it at the airport in Tucson when I caught the flight to Phoenix. But my cousin Tommy lives about 20 miles from here. He's got a four-wheel drive pickup that could handle these mountain roads even in this weather." "How would you contact him?" Dr. Walsh asked. Joseph held up the old radio, which was crackling with static but picking up signals. "If I can raise someone on the emergency frequency, they might be able to relay a message. Tommy's got a CB radio in his truck for when he's hunting in the backcountry." It was a long shot, but it was something. Joseph spent the next half hour working with the radio, trying different frequencies and call signs, hoping to reach someone who could help. The old military equipment was built to last, and despite its age, it seemed to be functioning. Finally, he made contact with a ham radio operator in Flagstaff who agreed to help relay messages. Within another hour, through a chain of radio operators and CB users, Joseph had managed to get word to his cousin Tommy about their situation. The response came back faster than anyone had dared hope. Tommy Running Bear was already on his way, along with his wife Sarah, who was a registered nurse. They had a truck equipped for mountain rescue work, and Sarah was bringing emergency medical supplies. "How long until they get here?" Maria asked, holding Sophia close as her daughter dozed fitfully. "Tommy said 2 hours, maybe less if the roads aren't too bad," Joseph replied. "Sarah will be able to help stabilize Sophia for the trip to Phoenix." But even as he spoke the words of hope, Joseph could see that 2 hours might be too long. Sophia's condition was clearly deteriorating, and Dr. Walsh was having to work harder and harder to keep the child stable with their limited equipment. It was then that Joseph made a decision that surprised even himself. He walked to a corner of the hangar where he had noticed an old military cot, still in usable condition despite its age. He moved it to the center of the space and gestured for Maria to bring Sophia over. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Something my grandfather taught me," Joseph replied. "Sometimes the old ways can help when the new ways aren't enough." He knelt beside the cot where Sophia now lay, her small form almost swallowed by the military blankets. Her breathing was labored, and her lips had taken on a blue tinge that frightened everyone in the hangar. "In my culture," Joseph said softly, speaking directly to Sophia, "we believe that healing comes not just from medicine, but from the connection between all living things. We believe that when someone is sick, the whole community can help by sharing their strength." He placed his hand gently on Sophia's forehead, and Maria was surprised to feel no alarm at this stranger touching her daughter. Instead, she felt a deep sense of rightness, as if this was exactly what was supposed to happen. "Sophia, I want you to imagine that you're an eagle," Joseph continued, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of traditional storytelling. "Eagles are the strongest birds in the sky. They can fly higher than any other creature, and they're never afraid of storms." Sophia's eyes opened, and focused on Joseph's face with more clarity than she had shown in hours. When an eagle is hurt, Joseph continued, all the other eagles in the sky send their strength to help. They form a great circle in the air, and they all fly together, sharing their power until the hurt eagle can fly again. As he spoke, something extraordinary began to happen. Carlos moved to stand beside his daughter's cot, placing his own hand on her arm. Dr. Walsh, setting aside her medical equipment for the moment, joined them. Even Captain Martinez, though still unconscious, seemed to breathe more easily. Maria felt tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of despair anymore. They were tears of recognition, of understanding that her family was no longer alone in this fight. This Apache pilot, this man who had appeared in their darkest hour, was offering something that went beyond medical care or transportation. He was offering community, connection, the strength that comes from people choosing to care for each other. I can feel the other eagles, Sophia whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in hours. They're flying in a circle around me. That's right, Joseph said, smiling. And they're all sending you their strength. Every breath you take, you're getting stronger. Every heartbeat, you're getting ready to fly again. For the next hour, while they waited for Tommy and Sarah to arrive, the little group maintained their vigil around Sophia's cot. They talked quietly, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their dreams. Maria learned that Joseph had lost his own daughter in a car accident 5 years earlier, and that flying had become his way of healing from that devastating loss. Carlos spoke about his work in the copper mines, about the dangers he faced every day, and how thinking of his family kept him safe. Dr. Walsh talked about why she had become a pediatric surgeon, about the children she had been able to save, and the ones she had lost. And Sophia, though still critically ill, seemed to grow stronger with each story, as if the sharing of their humanity was indeed providing her with some form of healing that medical science couldn't quite explain. When they finally heard the rumble of Tommy's truck approaching through the storm, everyone in the hangar felt a surge of hope. The vehicle that appeared through the rain was a massive four-wheel drive pickup, equipped with winches, emergency lights, and all the gear needed for mountain rescues. Tommy Running Bear was a larger, younger version of his cousin Joseph, with the same steady confidence and quiet strength. Sarah Running Bear was a small, energetic woman whose nurse's training was immediately evident in the way she assessed both patients and quickly organized the transfer to the truck. We've got oxygen, 4 fluids, and cardiac monitors in the truck, Sarah announced as she worked. We can keep both patients stable during the drive to Phoenix. The transfer was accomplished quickly and efficiently. Captain Martinez was loaded onto a stretcher in the truck's bed, which had been converted into a mobile medical unit. Sophia was secured in the cab with Maria and Dr. Walsh, surrounded by medical equipment and warmed by the truck's heater. As they prepared to leave, Maria realized she had something important to say to Joseph. I don't know how to thank you, she began, but he interrupted her gently. There's no need for thanks, he said. This is what people do for each other. But you saved our lives. You saved my daughter. Joseph was quiet for a moment, looking out at the storm that was finally beginning to weaken. 5 years ago, I lost someone very precious to me. I've spent all that time wondering why I couldn't save her. Tonight, I think I understand. Sometimes we can't save the people we love the most, but we can save someone else's precious person. That's how the circle stays complete. Maria felt the truth of his words resonate deep in her soul. Will I see you again? She asked. I hope so, Joseph replied. But even if our paths don't cross again in this life, we'll always be connected. That's what happens when people share a storm together. As Tommy's truck pulled away from the abandoned airstrip, Maria looked back to see Joseph standing in the hangar doorway, silhouetted against the pale light. He raised his hand in farewell, and she knew that image would stay with her for the rest of her life. The drive to Phoenix took 3 hours through treacherous mountain roads, but Sarah's medical care kept both patients stable throughout the journey. Sophia's oxygen levels improved steadily, and by the time they reached Phoenix Children's Hospital, she was alert and talking. Captain Martinez regained consciousness during the drive and made a full recovery from his heart attack. Within a week, he was back to flying medical transports, though he never forgot the Apache pilot who had saved not only his passengers but his own life as well. Sophia's surgery took place the following morning and was completely successful. The experimental procedure repaired her damaged heart, and within a month, she was running and playing like any normal 5-year-old. The doctors called it a miracle, and Maria knew they were right, though perhaps not in the way they meant. But even as her daughter recovered and their lives returned to normal, Maria found herself thinking constantly about Joseph Running Bear and the promise he had made during the storm. He had promised to get them to safety, and he had kept that promise in ways that went far beyond simply landing the plane. She tried to find him, calling the airport in Tucson, contacting various airlines, even reaching out to the San Carlos Apache tribal offices. But Joseph seemed to have vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared, leaving behind only the memory of his steady voice and his promise that they would find each other again. Maria kept that promise close to her heart, believing with absolute certainty that their story was far from over. Some connections transcend time and distance, and some promises echo across the years, waiting for the right moment to be fulfilled. 15 years had passed since that storm-lashed night in the mountains, but Maria Santos had never forgotten the Apache pilot who had saved her daughter's life. Sophia was now 20 years old, a healthy college student studying elementary education, just as she had dreamed when she was 5. The scar from her heart surgery was barely visible, a thin line on her chest that served as the only physical reminder of how close she had come to death. Maria had moved her family to Phoenix after Sophia's surgery, wanting to be near the medical specialists who had given her daughter a new life. Carlos found work in construction, and Maria became a translator at the hospital, helping Spanish-speaking families navigate the complex world of American medical care. She never worked a day without thinking about the fear she had felt as a young mother, and she dedicated herself to ensuring that other families wouldn't face that terror alone. But despite their new life and Sophia's complete recovery, Maria had never stopped looking for Joseph Running Bear. She had written letters to Apache tribal councils, contacted veterans organizations, and even hired a private investigator for a brief period when finances allowed. Every lead had turned into a dead end. Every promising contact had led nowhere. It was as if Joseph Running Bear had simply vanished from the earth after that night, leaving behind only the memory of his steady hands on the controls and his promise that they would find each other again. Then, on a warm September morning in 2040, everything changed. Maria was working at her desk in the hospital's family services department when a young woman appeared in her doorway. She was tall and lean, with long black hair and amber eyes that seemed startlingly familiar. "Excuse me," the woman said. "I'm looking for Maria Santos. I was told she works in this department." "I'm Maria," she replied, setting down her pen and giving the young woman her full attention. "My name is Anna Running Bear," the woman said, and Maria felt her heart skip a beat. "I think you knew my father." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with 15 years of hope and searching. Maria's hands began to tremble slightly as she gestured for Anna to sit down. Your father, Maria repeated carefully. Would that be Joseph Running Bear? Anna nodded, and Maria could see so much of Joseph in her features now that she knew to look for it. The same steady gaze, the same quiet strength that seemed to radiate from within. You're the woman from the plane? Anna said. The one with the little girl who needed heart surgery. Yes, Maria whispered, tears already beginning to form in her eyes. Your father saved our lives. He promised he would get us to safety, and he did. But afterward, I could never find him. I looked for years. Anna's expression grew somber. He told me about that night many times. He said it was one of the most important things he had ever done. He called you and your family his storm angels. The past tense in Anna's words sent a chill through Maria's heart. Called us. Is your father? He died 2 years ago, Anna said gently. Cancer. But before he passed, he made me promise to find you and your daughter. He said there was something he needed me to tell you. Maria felt as if the air had been knocked out of her lungs. For 15 years, she had held on to the hope that she would see Joseph again, that she would be able to thank him properly for what he had done. Now that hope was gone, replaced by a grief that surprised her with its intensity. I'm so sorry, she managed to say. Your father was an extraordinary man. He was, Anna agreed, but he would want you to know that saving your family gave his life meaning again. After my sister died in that car accident, he was lost for a long time. He blamed himself for not being there to protect her. But that night on the plane, when he was able to save Sophia, it helped him heal. Maria wiped away tears, struggling to process this revelation. He had another daughter, my older sister, Jessica. She was killed by a drunk driver when she was 12. Dad was flying commercial flights at the time, away more than he was home. He always felt that if he had been there, somehow he could have prevented it. The pieces of Joseph's story were beginning to come together in Maria's mind, painting a picture of a man shaped by both loss and redemption. Is that why he was on our plane that night? Was he traveling for work? Anna shook her head. He was coming to Phoenix to visit Jessica's grave. It was the anniversary of her death, and he made that trip every year. He said later that meeting you and Sophia was Jessica's way of showing him that he still had a purpose. Maria found herself crying in earnest now, overwhelmed by the realization that their chance encounter had been part of a larger tapestry of healing and connection that she had never fully understood. He wanted you to know something else, Anna continued, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small package wrapped in brown paper. He wanted you to have this. With shaking hands, Maria unwrapped the package to reveal a carved wooden eagle, its wings spread in flight. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every feather detailed with loving precision. At the base of the carving was a small plaque that read, For Sophia, who taught an old eagle to fly through storms again. Joseph Running Bear. He carved it himself, Anna explained. He was working on it for years, never quite satisfied that it was good enough. He said Sophia was like an eagle, strong enough to rise above any storm. Maria held the carving to her chest, feeling the smooth wood against her palm and imagining Joseph's hands shaping each detail. Sophia needs to see this. She needs to meet you. She's in college now, studying to be a teacher. I was hoping you would say that, Anna said, smiling for the first time since she had arrived. Dad made me promise to tell her something too. Before Maria could ask what message Joseph had wanted to convey to her daughter, Sophia herself appeared in the doorway. At 20 years old, she was a beautiful young woman, her dark hair flowing over her shoulders and her eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. Mom, I came by to have lunch with you, Sophia said, then paused as she noticed Anna. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were with someone. Sophia, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. I want you to meet Anna Running Bear. She's the daughter of the pilot who saved our lives when you were little. Sophia's expression changed immediately, recognition and wonder filling her eyes. She had grown up hearing the story of that night, of the Apache pilot who had appeared like a guardian angel in their darkest hour. Your father, Sophia said, moving closer to Anna. Is he here? I wanted to meet him my whole life. Anna gently explained about Joseph's death, and Sophia's face crumpled with disappointment and grief for a man she had never really known but who had shaped her entire life. But he wanted me to give you a message, Anna continued. He said to tell you that eagles mate for life, and that the connections we make in the storm never really end. He said that even though he's gone, he'll always be flying with you, helping you soar. Sophia began to cry, and Maria put her arms around her daughter, both of them mourning the loss of the man who had given them the gift of each other's continued presence. There's more, Anna said softly. Dad left instructions for me to bring you both to the reservation if you were willing. He's buried there, in the mountains where he grew up. But more than that, he wanted you to meet the rest of our family. He said you were part of our story now, and we were part of yours. The trip to the San Carlos Apache Reservation took place the following weekend. Maria, Sophia, and Carlos drove through the same mountainous terrain where Joseph had guided their failing plane 15 years earlier, though now they traveled on smooth highways in the comfort and safety of their own car. Anna met them at the tribal headquarters and gave them a tour of the reservation, sharing stories about her father's childhood and his connection to the land. They visited the small cemetery where Joseph was buried, his grave marked with a simple stone that bore his name, his dates of service in the military, and a carved eagle in flight. Sophia knelt beside the grave and placed a bouquet of wildflowers on the stone. Thank you, she said simply, and Maria knew that those two words carried the weight of an entire lifetime of gratitude. But the most moving part of their visit came that evening, when Anna brought them to meet her extended family. The Running Bear clan had gathered for a traditional dinner, and Maria was overwhelmed by the warmth with which they were welcomed. Joseph's elderly mother, Elena Running Bear, was especially moved to meet them. At 92, she was still sharp and energetic, and she embraced Maria as if she were a long-lost daughter. Joseph told me about you, Elena said in accented but clear English. He said you taught him that saving one person can save a whole family. You gave him back his purpose. He gave us everything, Maria replied. Without him, Sophia wouldn't be here. And without Sophia, Joseph would never have found peace, Elena said. In our tradition, we believe that some people come into our lives to teach us what we need to learn. You and Joseph were teachers for each other. Over dinner, Maria learned more about Joseph's life than she had ever imagined. She discovered that he had been a decorated military pilot who had flown rescue missions in Afghanistan, saving countless soldiers and civilians. After his daughter Jessica's death, he had struggled with depression and survivor's guilt, questioning why he could save strangers but hadn't been able to protect his own child. His work as a commercial pilot had been part of his healing process, but it wasn't until that stormy night when he met Maria's family that he had truly found peace with his daughter's death. He used to say that Jessica sent you to him, Anna explained. He said that night taught him that love doesn't end with death. It just finds new ways to express itself. As the evening progressed, Maria found herself surrounded by stories of Joseph's kindness and generosity. She learned that he had quietly helped dozens of families over the years, using his pilot skills to fly medical transport for free when families couldn't afford commercial flights. He had also worked with tribal youth programs, teaching young people about aviation and encouraging them to pursue careers in fields where Native Americans were underrepresented. He never talked about any of that, Maria said, amazed by the scope of Joseph's quiet heroism. He wasn't the kind of man who needed recognition, Elena said. He just did what needed to be done. The next morning, Anna took Maria and Sophia to the old abandoned airstrip where Joseph had landed their plane 15 years earlier. The military hangar was still standing, though even more weathered than it had been during the storm. The runway was overgrown with desert plants, but the basic structure remained intact. He used to come here sometimes, Anna said as they walked through the hangar where they had all huddled together on that terrifying night. He said this place reminded him that miracles could happen in the most unlikely circumstances. Sophia walked to the spot where her cot had been placed, where Joseph had told her the story about eagles flying in circles to share their strength. The concrete floor was cracked and stained, but she could still feel the power of that moment, the way a stranger's kindness had literally saved her life. "I want to do something to honor your father's memory," Sophia said suddenly, turning to Anna with determination in her eyes. "What do you have in mind?" Anna asked. "I'm going to be a teacher, like I always planned. But I want to specialize in working with children who have medical challenges, kids who are facing the same kind of fear I felt when I was little. And I want to tell them about the eagles, about how people can come together to help each other fly through the storms." Anna smiled, and Maria could see Joseph's quiet strength reflected in her expression. He would like that very much. Before they left the reservation, Elena, Running Bear, gave Maria a gift that would become one of her most treasured possessions. It was a traditional Apache wedding blanket, woven with intricate patterns that told the story of the eagle's journey through the seasons. "This has been in our family for 5 generations, Elena explained. "It represents the belief that some connections transcend time and space, that love creates bonds that nothing can break." "I can't accept something so precious," Maria protested. "Your family now," Elena said firmly. "Joseph made that choice 15 years ago when he promised to keep you safe. Family takes care of family." The drive home to Phoenix was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts about the weekend's revelations. But as they reached the city limits, Sophia suddenly spoke up from the back seat. "Mom, I understand now why we could never find him." "What do you mean?" Maria asked. "He wasn't hiding from us. He was waiting for the right time for us to find each other again. He knew that when we were ready to understand the full meaning of what happened that night, Anna would come to us." Maria nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her daughter's words. "He always said we would find each other again." "We have," Sophia said simply. "Not the way we expected, but in the way that matters most." The years that followed brought Maria's family and the Running Bear clan closer together. Sophia finished her education degree and began working with hospitalized children, using the story of the Eagle Circle to help young patients find strength during their own medical battles. Maria continued her work as a hospital translator, but she also began volunteering with organizations that helped Native American families access medical care. She discovered that her experience navigating the medical system as a Spanish-speaking immigrant had given her insights that could help other marginalized families. Anna Running Bear became a close family friend, someone Sophia considered sister. She was studying to become a nurse practitioner, inspired by her father's example of quiet service to others. Every year on the anniversary of that stormy night, the two families would meet at Joseph's grave to share stories and remember the man who had brought them together. They would talk about the lives that had been saved directly and indirectly because of Joseph's decision to help a desperate family in their darkest hour. And sometimes when the wind was just right and the desert sky was painted with clouds, they would see eagles circling overhead and remember Joseph's words about how love never really ends. It just finds new ways to take flight. Sophia, now a successful teacher and mentor to hundreds of children, never forgot the lesson she learned in that abandoned hangar. That strangers could become family in an instant, that promises made in desperation could echo across decades, and that sometimes the most important thing one person could do for another was simply to show up when they were needed most. Joseph Running Bear had kept his promise in ways that none of them could have imagined on that terrifying night 15 years earlier. He had not only flown them safely through the storm, but he had woven their lives into a larger story of healing, connection, and hope that continued to grow and spread with each passing year. The carved eagle he had made for Sophia sat on her desk in her classroom, where every day it reminded her students that they too could learn to fly through any storm, supported by the love and strength of those who chose to care about their journey. And in the end, Maria realized that was perhaps the greatest gift Joseph Running Bear had given them. Not just the salvation of that one desperate night, but the understanding that we are all connected, all responsible for each other's flight through the storms of life, all capable of being someone else's unexpected angel when a moment calls for it.